Welcome to our third and final installment of lessons on Andrew Jackson. In this lesson, we'll continue to investigate whether or not Andrew Jackson was more filling the role of King Andrew or the common man's president. Now, the first issue I'd like to discuss is Jackson's Native American policy. You see, Jackson believed that the attempt to assimilate the natives had failed. And what that means is, to kind of give them our culture and our customs and have them, learn our ways. But he also knew that if we had assimilated them, their way of life would have been destroyed anyways. Furthermore, he also knew that whites were beginning to covet or desire their lands. And if the natives were allowed to stay where they were living, chances are that they might be exterminated. And because of this, part of his platform that he ran upon in 1828 was a promise to remove the natives out of the southeastern part of the United States. Now, this would have pleased the plantation owners because it would give them more land to use as plantations and bring in more fertile land. But it also pleased the frontiersmen because it eliminated the threat of native attacks and opened up more land for them to live on. And so when he became president, he set his goal on removing the natives. But before Jackson's actually able to implement his plan to remove the natives, this whole process has to kind of go through the courts and legislatures and state and federal governments. And it plays out that there's a couple Supreme Court decisions. Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, 1831. But the one I'll mention is Worcester versus Georgia of 1832. And what this said was that the Cherokee Nation, who had resided primarily in Georgia, you can see there, could only be dealt with by the federal government. Treaties and laws being passed by the federal government and not the states. And however, that didn't kind of appease Jackson or play into his hand. So he said that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall, had made his decision, so let him enforce it. When in all reality, Jackson's the head of the executive branch, and it's his job to enforce the law and the Constitution. So Jackson basically lets Georgia kind of deal with the native question themselves. And as you see then, a lot of these native tribes are going to be removed along these various trails out to Oklahoma, which is kind of set up as one big reservation. And as you may be already aware of the sad story of the Trail of Tears, as this civilized nation of the Cherokee, who had kind of fought long and hard, to kind of stay on their, native grounds, eventually were forced, albeit after Jackson was out as president. But you can see they're eventually sent down this trail out to Oklahoma, where nearly 1 out of 4 of them are going to die along the way. Very tough travels, for the elderly, for the young, the sick. A lot of times these tribes aren't given the food and the shelter, clothing, and care that they're promised. And so it really turns out to be a very sad chapter in the Native American history. And for the United States, for that matter. So as Jackson gets his way when dealing with the Native Americans, he'll also get his way in dealing with the Second Bank of the United States. Now, this kind of plays out to be the greatest party battle that he has to deal with, that being the rechartering of the Second Bank of the United States. Now, this bank was a mixed public-private institution, which really was kind of basically just a government-sponsored monopoly. And whereas Clay and Webster defended rechartering the bank, as you know and are quite well aware, Jackson resoundingly stood against the bank. He didn't like banks and large industries and monopolies and and things like that. In fact, Jackson and many others believe that the bank concentrated too much wealth and power in the hands of the privileged. Now, whereas before the bank was kind of looked at as maybe being corrupt and causing financial difficulties and problems, once it was reorganized under the man pictured on the left, Nicholas Biddle, it became much more smoothly run and beneficial to the economic system that the United States was developing during this time. Now, the bank was there to hold the country's money, make loans, and help regulate the currency. And Biddle did a good job of kind of helping the bank be successful at that. However, Henry Clay wants to make the bank a campaign issue in 1832 as he's going to run for president against Jackson. And so he gets Congress to recharter the bank early, knowing very well that Jackson's going to veto that bill. And that's exactly what Jackson does, is veto that rechartering of the bank. And so as the 1832 election approaches, and as Clay runs as the National Republican against Jackson, the Democrat, it's really going to play out that Jackson is going to win over the people of the United States and really resoundingly defeat Clay. In fact, Jackson garners 219 electoral votes to just 49 for Henry Clay. And so, as Jackson once said, the bank is trying to kill me, I will kill it. That's exactly what he does. And so the second bank in the United States proved to be the main issue in the 1832 election. It's not long after that that the bank is officially dead. Because after Jackson's veto in 32, the charter for the bank eventually expires in 1836, and by 1841, the bank had gone bankrupt. But during this time, to help speed up the death of the bank, Jackson actually removes the deposits from the bank and deposits them in state and local banks, which get the nickname pet banks. And that helps kind of make the United States Bank bankrupt. Therefore, once again, as you see, Jackson's able to accomplish his goals. And with that, we see the beginning of a new political party, one that takes its name after a party in the British Parliament, the Whigs. Now, the Whigs basically was a conglomeration of just people who dislike Andrew Jackson. Some of their goals and things that they liked was they had liked the national bank and wanted to keep it. They'd like the high protective tariffs to help protect industry. And they also wanted the federal financing of internal improvements. But they start to kind of show Jackson as this tyrant, king-type personality who tramples upon the Constitution and just does whatever he wants to get whatever he wants. And so, whereas Jackson might be looked at as the common man's president, you can also see why he'd be looked at as King Andrew, as it's really because of him that he establishes the presidency as not just one who carries out the law, but can also influence and shape the laws and federal policy. And he kind of really puts the president on an equal footing as Congress. In fact, he'd use the power of veto 12 times, more than all of his predecessors combined. But he didn't just veto things because he thought they were unconstitutional. He did it on basic principle, ideology, belief. And he thought that that was okay for a president to do that. So you can kind of see the question. Was Jackson the common man's president or King Andrew?